My name is Molly Ingram and I'm 34 years old. 2 springs ago, on a muddy soccer field in Ohio, my stepson scored his first goal, ran straight past his birth mother, and yelled it right at me. "Mom!" He said it out loud. He said it in front of 24 parents, in front of his coach, and in front of the one woman in my family's orbit who had been waiting for a reason. 3 weeks later, a process server handed my husband a stack of court papers accusing me of trying to steal her son. Every pancake I ever flipped was in there. Every bedtime story, every quiet, careful thing I had done for that little boy, rewritten as evidence against me. But here's what none of us standing on that wet grass knew. That little word had been planned for weeks, just not by me. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where family secrets come to light and quiet strength wins the day. We tell stories about ordinary people who hold their ground with grace when the people closest to them cross the line. If that speaks to you, drop a comment below, hit like, and be sure to subscribe. Now, let me take you back to the beginning. I should tell you who I am because the court file got it wrong. I'm a pediatric nurse, 11 years on the floor. I've held down toddlers for stitches and talked grown men through their daughter's chemo. Family court, it turns out, is worse than all of it. I met David a few years back through a mom whose son I'd cared for at the hospital. She swore we'd get along. She was right. David taught math at the high school and coached baseball in the spring, and he had a little boy with brown cowlicks and strong opinions about sharks. We married in June, almost 2 years before that soccer game, and before I ever moved a single box into his house, I wrote myself a rule book, real rules, in a real spiral notebook because I chart everything. Rule 1, I am Jacob's stepmom, and that is the only word I use. Rule 2, I don't attend anything his mother attends unless Jacob himself asks me. Rule 3, I never say one bad word about his mommy. Not in front of him, not behind him, not in my own kitchen with the doors shut. People ask me why I was so careful. I'd shrug and say, nurses are like that. The truth sat deeper. I knew the rules because I'd once been the kid in the middle, and I still remembered what the middle does to a child's stomach on a school night. I'll get to that part. What matters here is simple. I followed every rule I wrote every single day for 3 years, and it didn't save me. It turns out you can do everything right and still end up as Exhibit A in someone else's war. Jacob didn't warm up to me because I tried hard. He warmed up because I didn't. The kid had radar for effort like most kids do, so I just existed near him. I made pancakes on the Saturdays he stayed with us, and one morning I cut them into shark fins because we were out of blueberries and I needed a distraction. That became a thing. Shark Saturdays. He had a loose tooth that he refused to tell anyone about because a boy at school said, the tooth fairy skips houses with 2 addresses. He told me instead at the kitchen counter in a whisper. I said the tooth fairy runs a route like a mail carrier and never skips. He found that answer acceptable. The custody schedule gave David alternating weeks plus Tuesday and Thursday evenings. And on those evenings, Jacob and I did his reading log. 20 minutes, a beanbag chair, a chapter book about a shark named Clark. He called me Molly, just Molly. That was the deal. And honestly, it was enough. His mother, Laura, had him the rest of the time. 15 minutes away, in the same school district, and we kept the peace the way you keep a soap bubble. Carefully, don't breathe on it. Once reading in the beanbag, he got sleepy and mumbled mall and then a beat later lie. Like the word had almost slid somewhere else on the way out. He laughed. I laughed. I didn't think about it again for months. I should have not because he did anything wrong, because someone else was listening to how that boy loved me, and she was taking a very different kind of note. Laura Kessler was not a monster. I want that on the record since so much else got on the record. She was a dental hygienist with a perfect calendar and a spotless car, and she loved Jacob in a fierce checklisted way. His birthday party that February was at a trampoline place planned to the minute. I came because Jacob asked me at pickup, bouncing on his toes, and Rule 2 says Jacob's ask wins. I stayed near the wall. I handed him our gift, a shark encyclopedia the size of a coffee table. He hugged me around the waist and held on maybe a second longer than diplomacy allowed. Across the room, Laura's mother, Carol, watched us over her coffee. She said loudly enough, "What a devoted babysitter." In the kitchen later, boxing up cake, Laura smiled at me, a calm, pleasant, terrifying smile. "There is only one mom," she said. "He doesn't get 2. Then she handed me a slice of cake like we'd been discussing the weather. I drove home and told David we needed boundaries thicker than mine. From then on, I said all scheduling goes through the co-parenting app. Nothing verbal, nothing casual, nothing I could be miscued on. David thought I was overreacting. I'd seen enough custody fights come through the hospital to know I wasn't. Here's the strange part. In March, Laura changed. She was friendly. She waved at the drop-off. She told David that Jacob talks about Molly all the time. Isn't that sweet? My alarm bells rang, and I couldn't explain why. Warm was better than cold, wasn't it? It took me half a year to learn what that warmth was. It was a hunter putting out feed. The second Saturday in April was a home game against a team in orange. Wet grass, a whistle with a dying battery, orange slices sweating in a cooler. I stood on the sideline with David holding Jacob's water bottle, because that was my job and I liked it. Laura stood 40 feet down with her friend Dana. I noticed without knowing, that Dana had her phone up the whole first half, not scrolling up filming the way you film when you're waiting for something. In the second half, a kid in orange bobbled a pass, and Jacob, my cautious, shark-loving Jacob, stole the ball and ran it all the way in. His first goal ever. The parents cheered. He spun around, scanning the sideline, wild with joy, and he ran past his coach, past his mother, straight at me. "Mom, did you see it? Did you see?" The word landed on that field like a dropped glass. I saw Laura's face change in real time, and I saw one beat behind it. Dana's phone swung toward us. Laura crossed the grass fast. "Are you teaching him to call you that?" Her voice carried to both goals. 24 parents went quiet in a way I can still hear. Jacob's face crumpled. But you." He started, and Laura took his wrist and steered him toward the parking lot, mid-sentence, cleats dragging. I stood there holding a water bottle with his name on it in my own handwriting. David said her name once uselessly. The whistle blew somewhere behind us. For weeks afterward, one question kept me up at night, and it wasn't the one everybody assumed. It was this. "But you, what had my 7-year-old been about to say?" That night was hours on the schedule, and Laura returned him at 7 sharp, silent as a subpoena. Jacob picked at his dinner. At bedtime, he asked the question that broke my heart cleaner than anything an adult said all year. "Did I do a bad thing?" I sat on the edge of his bed and gave him my nurse voice. The one I use before a shot. "Nobody. Words slip. Kids call their teacher mom sometimes. Nobody's mad at you." He nodded at his shark lamp, unconvinced, and asked if the tooth fairy thing was still true about male carriers never skipping. "Still true?" I said. He slept, I didn't. At 11, David's phone lit up with a message through the co-parenting app, and he read it twice and then handed it to me with a strange look. "I am documenting this incident," it said. "This reflects an ongoing pattern of boundary erosion and parental interference that I have tolerated for too long." There were more sentences like that, stacked like cinder blocks. Pattern, erosion, interference. David stared at the screen. "She doesn't write like that," he said. Laura writes in emojis and exclamation points. She once texted me a birthday reminder with a cake. "This reads like a deposition. He was right, and the wrongness of it sat down in my chest and stayed." Somebody had helped her write that message. Somebody with a billing rate. And if a lawyer's voice was already coming out of her phone 2 hours after a soccer game, then that lawyer hadn't been hired that afternoon. The paperwork, when it came, would only confirm what I understood standing in my kitchen that night. The game had not started. 3 weeks later, a polite man in a windbreaker asked David to confirm his name on our porch and handed him a manila envelope. "Motion to modify parenting time with a request for restraining provisions against," and I am quoting the caption of my own life here, "the stepmother's parental interference." I read all of it at the kitchen table with a highlighter because I cope by charting. Page 4, the pancakes. A calculated campaign to buy the child's affection through food rituals. Page 5, the reading log. On some Tuesdays I had signed the school's form on the line marked parent's signature because that was the only line the form had, holding herself out as the child's parent in written school records. Page 6. The parent-teacher conference I attended sitting next to David, where I hardly opened my mouth and only about sharks inserting herself into educational decision-making. My marriage was in there. As a strategy, my job was in there, twisted a pediatric nurse, uniquely aware of methods of psychological influence. I laughed out loud at that one, and then I stopped laughing because the next paragraph mentioned a family drawing, described as troubling evidence of intentional parental displacement. I had never seen any drawing and stapled behind everything an affidavit from Laura, with one sentence that I recognized like a face. There is only one mother in this child's life. The last page asked the court to bar me from acting as a parent at Jacob's school and his doctor's office. I put down the highlighter. In my hallway hung a photo of Jacob and me holding a cardboard shark we built for the science fair. I remember thinking with a strange calm, they will find a way to use that too. Susan Novak had been doing family law for 30 years, and her office smelled like coffee and other people's worst days. She read the motion in 11 minutes flat, then looked at us over her glasses. First, she said, "This does not get custody changed. No judge strips a father's time because a child called a stepmother mom at a soccer game." Second, she said, and I want you to hear me. Alienation claims are fog. You cannot punch fog. Every kind thing you do from today forward can be photographed, time-stamped, and stapled into their story. The court will likely appoint a guardian ad litem, a neutral investigator for Jacob. This will take months, not weeks. The retainer was $7,500, which was our kitchen renovation, gone in one signature. Then she flipped to the original divorce decree and tapped a paragraph I'd never read closely. "Right of first refusal," she said. "If David can't personally care for Jacob for more than 4 hours, Laura gets the first option before anyone else before you. It's a standard clause. It's also a weapon if someone decides to swing it." I asked how often people swing it. Susan took off her glasses. "Mrs. Ingram," she said, "you seem like a careful woman. Get ready to be careful in a smaller and smaller room." On the drive home, David held my hand at every red light, and neither of us said much. I kept thinking about fog, and about how I had spent 3 years being unimpeachable, and how unimpeachable had just become a symptom. She swung the clause that same Friday. But before I tell you about the shrinking room, let me say this. If you've ever had the nicest thing you do twisted into the worst thing you've done, you know exactly where I was standing that week. Stay with me, because what that little boy did months later in a room I wasn't allowed into is the reason I can tell this story at all. If Snorts you're new here, take 1 second and subscribe. You're going to want the ending. Tuesday after the motion, I drove to Maplewood Elementary at 3:15, the way I had every Tuesday for 2 school years. The pickup line smelled like exhaust and graham crackers. I gave my name at the office window, and Mrs. Petty, who once asked me for my pancake recipe, would not meet my eyes. "I'm sorry," she said. "Your name has been removed from the pickup list pending the custody clarification. There's a letter on file, a letter from a law office dated 4 days earlier. The school wasn't taking sides," she explained, reciting it. "When there's a dispute, we can only release students to individuals named in the court order." I understood. I hated that I understood. Through the glass behind her, I could see the pickup benches, and I could see Jacob on the end of one backpack with the shark keychain, feet swinging, scanning the cars for mine. Nobody had told him either. I called David, who left baseball practice with an assistant coach covering, and 40 teenagers wondering. I waited in my car where Jacob couldn't see me, because a boy shouldn't watch his Molly be turned away at a window. That afternoon, the school mailed home updated paperwork, and in the stack was Jacob's emergency contact card. 4 lines, father, mother, then my name on line 3 with a red line drawn through it. Neat, bureaucratic final. Somebody's ballpoint had pressed hard enough to dent the card. I put it in a drawer under the takeout menu so David wouldn't have to see it. And then, being honest, I took it back out and looked at it for a long time. That red line was the first thing Laura's lawyer ever gave me. It would not be the last. Then came the clause. David coached Friday evenings and my hospital schedule runs 12-hour shifts. And Laura had a copy of both because co-parenting apps share calendars. Any window where David would be gone past 4 hours, she claimed. Fridays, a Tuesday when David had parent conferences, the Saturday of his team's away tournament. All of it legal, all of it correct, all of it aimed. Jacob started living out of a booster seat, backpack in one house, cleats in another, library book lost between the two. He fell asleep in the car so often that Laura bought a neck pillow, and I saw it on the seat at handoff, and something in me broke a little at how normal it looked. I'm a peace nurse. I know what stress looks like in a 7-year-old, and it doesn't announce itself. It chews its nails, it wets the bed again after 2 dry years, and it asks weird, careful questions at dinner. I flagged it to David the first week. He requested a schedule change from his athletic director, who is sympathetic and helpless because you can't reassign a head coach mid-season without benching the whole team in the spring. We adjusted everything we controlled. I moved 2 shifts. It wasn't enough hours to matter against a calendar Laura could read like radar. And then one Thursday in the beanbag chair, Jacob said the thing that told me this was worse than logistics. He wasn't reading. He was looking at the shark book without reading, which is different. Mommy asks me every night what you and I did, he said, and I don't know the right answer. I told him every answer that's true is right. He nodded like I'd given him homework. My stomach has not fully unclenched since. I said I'd get to the part about me. So here it is. Short version. When I was 9, my dad married a woman named Ruth. Ruth had flower hands and a laugh like a screen door. And she taught me to bandage a scraped knee without making it a production, which, if you're keeping score, is the entire job description of a pediatric nurse. I loved her fast, the way lonely kids do. My mother found out I'd hugged Ruth at a school concert, and on the drive home she gripped the wheel and said, "If you ever do that in front of me again, I will consider you lost to me." 9 years old, buckled in the back seat, learning the exchange rate on love. So I adapted. I loved Ruth in secret. In the daylight hours, my mother couldn't audit. And I became useful because useful people don't get sent away. I set the table before anyone asked. I got straight A's nobody had to check. I became the kind of nurse who charts everything twice, and the kind of stepmother who writes herself a rule book in a spiral notebook. You see the pattern? My whole life I believed belonging was a subscription you kept paid up through flawless performance. Ruth died the spring I turned 26. At her funeral, my mother told the assembled mourners she was glad Ruth never had children of her own. I remember deciding in that pew that if I ever got a Jacob, he would never, not for one afternoon, live in the middle the way I had. I wrote my rule book so Jacob would never live my childhood. Laura was about to hand it to him anyway, laminated with exhibits. The guardian adieu was appointed in May. Patricia Coyle, 58, sensible shoes, a canvas bag of legal pads, and the eyes of a woman who has been lied to by experts. Her job was to investigate both homes and tell the court what served Jacob, and I resolved to make her visit perfect. You already know where this is going. I cleaned the house to surgical standards. I laid out Jacob's routine in a binder, tabbed school, meds, allergies, dentist, the reading log, the shark diorama schedule. I printed extra copies in case she wanted one for her files. She walked through our home for an hour, asked Jacob's favorite dinner, asked what I did when he misbehaved, took notes in handwriting I couldn't read upside down, which I only know because I tried. At the door, she paused and said, "You keep a very organized home, Mrs. Ingram," in a tone I chose to hear as praise. 2 weeks later, Susan got a read on the preliminary impressions, as lawyers do, and gave it to me straight because I asked for things straight. She finds the home stable and the child bonded. Susan said, "She also described you as composed, prepared, and possibly rehearsed. Rehearsed 11 years of charting twice, of being the calm one in the room, of earning my keep through competence, and the first neutral observer of my life wrote it down as a warning sign. The one thing that had always kept me safe was now testifying against me. But here's what actually mattered from that visit, though I didn't know it yet. Patricia had asked Jacob about one thing only at length, the drawing from the motion, and Jacob had told her, "Matter of fact, I made it at school in March. March before the soccer field, before everything, I found out what the drawing was from Jacob's teacher, Miss Hartley, who told me only what any parent in that hallway could have seen, careful as a bomb tech about the rest. In March, her class had a unit called My Family. The kids drew their people and labelled them, and the drawings went up on the wall for spring open house. 22 crayon families under a paper rainbow. Snorts Jacob drew 3 stick figures. A woman with brown hair labelled Mommy, a tall man labelled Daddy, and a third figure, ponytail, holding what was unmistakably a frying pan, labelled Molly. There was a lopsided sun in the left corner, the same sun he puts in the corner of everything. That was it. That was the whole crime. A 7-year-old drew the people who love him, and included the one who makes the pancakes. Miss Hartley remembered open house night because Laura had stood in front of that wall for a long time, long enough to be noticed by a teacher managing 40 conversations at once. Then she photographed it and said nothing to anyone. And 3 weeks later, she got friendly at drop-off. And 5 weeks after that, Dana's phone came up at a soccer game and stayed up. I walked to my car doing the math over and over like a tongue on a chipped tooth. She saw the drawing in March. The warmth started in March. Whatever happened on that field had been loaded somewhere between a paper rainbow and a trampoline birthday party. I couldn't prove a word of it yet, but I finally understood the order of events. And the order of events was the whole story. A month later, that crayon drawing had a new name. Exhibit C. The formal response packet arrived in June, and I made the mistake of opening it alone at the kitchen table. Behind the legal caption in Re the Matter of Kessler versus Ingram, behind the numbered paragraphs, and the certificate of service, there was a photocopy. Jacob's drawing my family in his careful backward-leaning first-grade letters, Mommy, Daddy Molly with the frying pan. The lopsided sun has gone grey because photocopiers don't believe in suns, and in the bottom right corner a white sticker with black type exhibit. See, I sat with that page for a long time. I have held a lot of heavy things in my hands. Other people's newborns. A mother's shoulders while a doctor said the worst sentence there is. I'm telling you that a photocopied crayon drawing with an exhibit sticker on it is heavy. They stapled a 7-year-old's love behind a court caption. That is the sentence I couldn't get out of my head. So I said it out loud to the empty kitchen, and then I put the page in the binder because I chart things. It's how I stay upright. When David came home, he looked at it once and had to leave the room. And that weekend, Jacob, doing his reading log across the counter from me, asked without looking up, "Why did Mummy take a picture of my drawing? Did I spell something wrong?" I said, "You spelled everything right, buddy. Every single thing." He went back to Clark the shark. I went back to breathing. Remember that drawing? Hold it in your mind the way I held it in that kitchen, because that piece of paper was not finished with any of us. And when it came back in a way nobody in that courthouse saw coming. The interim hearing was in July in a beige room with a magistrate named Whitmore, who had voice of a man grading his 9,000th essay. Laura's attorney played the video. There it was on a courtroom screen. The wet field. The goal. My boy is spinning, scanning, and running. "Mom, did you see it? Did you see the freeze frame?" The clip stopped one breath after the word, cut clean before Jacob turned before the butt. But you before Laura's hand closed around his wrist. Edited grief looks very tidy. Her attorney called the video a window into a confused child's daily reality. Susan objected to half of it and won a third. Magistrate Whitmore rubbed his eyes and issued what courts issue when they can't yet know anything, an interim order, pending investigation. Mrs. Ingram shall not hold herself out as a parent to the child's school or medical providers. It wasn't a finding. Susan said that 4 times on the courthouse steps. It doesn't say you did anything. It says the fog needs time. But orders don't read the way they're intended. They read the way they land. I sign medication sheets all day. My signature keeps children safe from the wrong dose. And a court had just ordered me not to sign a 7-year-old's reading log. I went home and did something I'm not proud of. I watched Dana's clip 11 more times on David's copy of the exhibit with the sound up. And on the 11th time, I stopped asking what the video showed and started asking what a jury of one me could not stop wondering how long was the original recording. Why did it start before the goal? And who tells a friend to stand at a kid's soccer game filming the sideline instead of the game? 2 weeks into the new schedule chaos, Jacob stopped calling me anything at all. I noticed it the way you notice a missing tooth with your tongue before your brain catches up. He stood in the kitchen doorway one evening, twisting the hem of his shirt and said, "Hey, can I have some water? Hey, that was my new name. Not Molly, not anything, because somewhere between 2 houses, a boy had concluded that every name in his mouth was a landmine and the safest word is no word. I got him the water. I kept my voice level, nurse level, while something in my chest sat down on the floor. David and Laura had already agreed in one of their only civil exchanges that summer to get Jacob a therapist, a gentle woman named Dr. Reyes, with a sand tray and a fish tank. That agreement, for the record, is the single thing the whole apparatus got right on the first try. After a session in late July, Dr. Reyes told them both what I could have told anyone from a beanbag chair. He's learning that names have consequences. She said he's protecting the adults by erasing himself. He is 7. That night, I took out my spiral notebook, the rule book, and I wrote a new rule at the bottom. Rule 4, I need nothing. Not a name, not a title, not a thank you. Then I looked at it for a while, and I tore the page out because even I could hear it. The old reflex, the girl set the table so she wouldn't be sent away. Here is what I knew for certain by August. A kid too scared to say your name will still crawl into your lap after a nightmare. He did it twice. No court order reaches that far. Nothing does. In August, my steady husband hit his limit. He came home from a deposition prep call with Susan, dropped his keys in the bowl hard enough to chip it, and said, "We're done defending. I want to go after her." Investigator, her spending, her boyfriend history, a cycle, all of it. She is burning our family down, and I keep handing her matches. And I said, "No, not a gentle no, a flat one. I will not do to Jacob's mother what she is doing to me," I said. And David, who had watched me get erased from a pickup list without raising my voice, finally raised his. "You don't get to be the only person in this house with principles, Molly. Your principles are losing." It was our first real fight. The kind with a closed door and a spare blanket on the couch. He wasn't wrong about losing. I wasn't wrong about the matches. Near midnight, he came and sat on the edge of the bed and told me something I'd never heard in a voice I'd never heard. The day Laura's divorce was final, her mother, Carol, took her to lunch in public at the church women's favourite restaurant and told her divorce is what women do when they failed. Her own mother in front of the lunch crowd. That church, that women's circle, that scorekeeping, that's the water Laura swam in her whole life. David said, "I'm not excusing her, I just know where the wound is." I lay awake a long time after that because I knew that verdict. My mother had handed down the same one from the front seat of a car when I was 9. 2 women, 1 fear, 2 different ways of gripping. That thought didn't soften me, it clarified me. The last Thursday in August, Jacob spiked a fever. Nothing scary, 101 and change. A virus doing laps around the 2nd grade. It was our night on the calendar, and Laura, to her small credit, didn't fight the handoff. He couldn't sleep, so I sat against his headboard, and he leaned on my shoulder, hot and heavy, drifting in between places where feverish kids go, and out of that place, into the dark, he said it. "I did it wrong." "Did what wrong, buddy?" "The mom thing." He said, "Mommy practiced with me in the car. She said if I called you mom at my game after, I would get a surprise. But then she got mad anyway, so I did it wrong. Right?" The shark lamp hummed. My whole body went very still, the way it does at work when a monitor changes its mind. There it was, the missing half of butt. But you, the friendly march, the phone already up and filming, a little boy rehearsing a word in a booster seat, thinking it was a game, thinking there'd be a surprise, and the surprise was watching every adult he loves detonate. I want to be honest about the next 60 seconds because they were 60 full seconds. I am married to a man with a lawyer on retainer. My phone was in my pocket. One voice memo and this whole nightmare flips. I did not take out my phone. I did not ask him a single follow-up question. I was not going to turn my stepson's sickbed into a crime scene. And if you want to know the exact difference between me and the woman suing me, that pocket is where it lived. I pulled the blanket up and said, "You did nothing wrong, not one thing." And he was asleep before the sentence finished. Then I sat in the dark doing the terrible math. My stepson had just handed me the truth that could end the entire case, and I could never ever use it. If you've ever held proof you refuse to weaponize, tell me in the comments. I read them, and subscribe. Because the way that truth finally got out through a door I never touched still gives me chills. I told Susan the next morning in her office, no notes. I told her what he said and what I didn't do. And she looked at me the way triage nurses look at people who walked in, carrying their own severed finger in a lunchbox. Calm, impressed, slightly alarmed. "A feverish 7-year-old's bedtime sentence is not evidence," she said. "And you recording him or coaching him to repeat it would be the exact crime they've accused you of. So, we agree. We don't touch the boy." Then she leaned back and put her glasses on top of her head. "But there are clean doors," she said. "Door 1. They made that video in an exhibit. That opens discovery about the video itself, how it was made, who made it, and what was said around its making. I can subpoena the messages between Laura and the friend with the camera. That's not spying, that's the procedure. They invited it the moment they filmed the clip. Door 2. Patricia Coyle still has to interview Jacob alone. No parents, no scripts. It's a standard part of every Guardian Adjudant investigation. We don't request it. We don't shape it. It simply happens. Whatever that child says in that room, he says on his own. I sat with that, and then I set my one condition, and I made her write it down, which amused her not at all. Nobody prepares Jacob. Nobody rehearses him. Nobody so much as tells him the interview matters. If the truth walks out of that room, it walks out on its own feet. Susan said, "You understand you're tying my hands." I said, "My hands, you can tie him." Nobody ties it again. She sent the subpoena out that week. Discovery takes weeks. She warned me. These things crawl. The truth, as it turned out, took 9 days. The production came back on a Tuesday, a PDF of message threads with a cover letter, and Susan called me before I'd finished my shit. "Chief, come in," she said. "Bring David. Don't speed." The messages between Laura and Dana started 3 weeks before the soccer game. "Laura, be at the 10 game Saturday morning. I need you to film Dana." "Filming what?" "His team is terrible. No offense, Laura. Keep your phone on the sideline. On us the whole game. You'll know it when you hear it, Dana." "Okay." Weird, but fine. And then the one Susan had flagged with a paperclip. An actual paperclip, like it was 1995. "Laura, don't worry. I've been working on it with him all week. He'll say it 8 days after that." "Laura, did you get it? Send me the clip tonight before you send anything to anyone." I read the thread twice. David read it once and walked to the window and stood there with his hands on his head, like a man watching his house burn from the lawn, which in fairness is what he was. Susan was professionally speaking delighted. "This is manufactured evidence," she said. She built the incident, staged the camera, scripted her own outrage, and then filed the product with a court. Combine this with whatever the Guardian had lit him hears, and this case doesn't just collapse, it reverses. I should have felt the win. I want to tell you I felt the win. What I felt was the phrase, "I've been working on it with him all week," playing on a loop, working on it in a booster seat. A 7-year-old running lines with his mother and thinking the prize at the end was a surprise. I looked at the pages fanned out on Susan's nice table, the biggest weapon anyone had ever put in my hands. And my first complete thought was, so this is what it costs him. Before anything could reverse, September came, and with it the full family open house. Jacob had been building a shark diorama for 2 weeks. Hammerhead, hot glue, blue cellophane water. And he'd invited me back in the summer before any of us knew what fall would look like. "You have to see it," he'd said with capital letters in his voice. "Rule 2 says Jacob's ask wins." The interim order said I couldn't act like a parent. So I went as what I legally was, a guest of my husband, hands in my pockets. Name tag reading visitor. Laura came too because it was her right, and I want to be exact here. It was her right. What happened wasn't anyone's right. Jacob came around the corner from the gym, saw me and David by the door, lit up, then saw his mother by the classroom and stopped, full stop. Sneakers squeaking on wax. His eyes went left, right, left, and then my boy, who runs at everything, turned and bolted down the hallway and locked himself in the boys' bathroom. It took the counsellor, Miss Alvarez, 40 minutes of talking through a door decorated with paper owls. The whole hallway of families pretended not to listen. I stood exactly where I'd stopped, because moving felt like taking a side of the hallway through the door loud enough for all of us. One sentence. "I don't want anybody to come to anything ever." Laura left before he came out. Not in victory. I watched her walk to her car, and she walked like a woman carrying something that had shifted and gotten heavier. David drove us home. Jacob sat in the back with his diorama on his knees. Nobody had seen the hammerhead. In the garage, in the dark, I finally said the sentence out loud that had been assembling itself in me for weeks. "Every way I win, he loses." My phone buzzed against the cup holder. Patricia Coyle's office. Jacob's interview was Monday. I wasn't in the room. That's the point of the room. Patricia interviewed Jacob alone at her office a Monday after school, with a sand tray and a basket of fidgets. And everything I know comes from the report she later filed, which Susan read to me in a conference room with the door shut. They talked about 2nd grade. They talked about sharks at length. Patricia's notes record the hammerhead's dietary habits with a straight face, and I will love her forever for that. And then unprompted, no question pending, Jacob told her. Mommy told me to call Molly Mom at my game. We practiced in the car. Then everybody got mad at Molly. He picked up a fidget, put it down and finished. Snorts Molly never asked me to call her that, not even once. She says, I already have a mommy. Patricia, neutral as Switzerland, asked what he wished would happen now. His answer is in the file verbatim, and it should be in a textbook. I want to stop being the mailman. She asked what he meant. Everybody keeps making me carry the words, he said. I'm the one that gets in trouble when they get delivered. 7 years old. Susan finished reading and set the report down like it was hot. With this in the text, she said, it's over. Their case doesn't have a leg. It doesn't have a flaw. We were winning. After 6 months of red lines and shrinking rooms, every card in the deck had just landed face up in my hand, and the little boy at the center of it had defended me better than any lawyer in Ohio to the one stranger whose whole job was to listen. So, I want you to understand what I say next, because it confuses everyone who loves me. I sat in that conference room holding total victory, and all I could feel was the floor going out from under a bathroom door decorated with paper owls. 3 days later, I saw the machine that built Laura in the parking lot of a pharmacy through a windshield. I'd stopped after a 12-hour shift to pick up a prescription, still in scrubs, and I clocked her car 2 spots down before I clocked her, because her car is always spotless. And it was spotless. Laura sat in the driver's seat, not moving. Her phone was face up on the dash on speaker, and her window was cracked, and the parking lot was empty and quiet the way parking lots are at 10 at night. And I heard it. Carol's voice, clipped and certain, the voice of a woman who has never once been contradicted at her own table. If that woman ends up raising him, then you were never really his mother. Do you hear me? You fix this, or don't come to Thanksgiving asking everyone to act normal. The call ended. Laura didn't cry. That's what I keep remembering. She sat with both hands on the wheel of a parked car, staring at their automatic doors like they were a test she was failing. And she looked exactly like a 9-year-old buckled into a back seat being taught the exchange rate on love. I stood there in the dark, holding my white paper bag unseen. I am not going to pretend the sight fixed anything. Understanding her did not mean excusing her. She built the trap. She rehearsed a baby in a booster seat and sprang it on all of us. And some morning very soon, a magistrate was going to read her own text messages back to her. That was all still true. But I drove home knowing one more true thing, and it changed the shape of everything I did afterward. Destroying Laura wouldn't end the machine. It would just prove the machine right and hand it a new child. Susan called that night with her plan to finish the case. Her plan, not mine. Susan's plan was clean and total, and she laid it out at our kitchen table, like a general with good news. We file the texts and the Guardian admins, manufacture evidence, litigation, abuse. We request fees, and we ask that her parenting time be supervised while she completes a psychological evaluation. You walk out officially blameless, Molly on paper, forever. There are days I can still taste that offer, and then I looked at the binder on the counter at the grey photocopy sticking out of it. Exhibit C, the sun gone grey. And I asked Susan one question. Is the file public? She said, what lawyers say, court records generally are. Some things can be sealed, no guarantees, so walk it forward with me, I said. Jacob turns 17. He's curious. Kids get curious, and he pulls the file, and he reads a court finding that says his mother lost him because of things he said in a room with a sand tray. He finds out his own sentences were the ammunition, that he was the mailman one last time, and the letter took his mother down. I looked at David. Every way I win that way, he loses. I watched my husband, who had wanted scorched earth since August, look at the drawing for a long moment and then nod once like something expensive breaking quietly. So, here is what we're going to do instead, I said, and I laid it out. The evidence stays in the holster. We use it once in private as leverage, and we trade it for the whole war. The schedule stays. Family therapy. All of us court-ordered so nobody can drift out of it. Every allegation withdrawn and the texts, the report. Jacob's words sealed away forever where he can never read them. Susan rubbed her temples and said, 30 years and no client has ever asked me not to win. I said, I'm asking you to win something else. The hearing was Tuesday. The Franklin County Courthouse on a Tuesday morning smells like floor wax and instant coffee and nerves. I emptied my pockets for the metal detector, watched my wedding ring roll around a grey plastic bowl, and thought about how many families had watched their whole lives roll around that bowl. We got there early. Laura's side got there earlier. She sat on the far bench in a blazer with the tags freshly cut, hands folded, and one row behind her, spine like a level, sat Carol in the good pearls, presiding. Dana was not there. Dana, Susan had told me, had gone very quiet since a subpoena with her name on it had entered the world. Laura's attorney looked relaxed. That's the detail I keep. He was relaxed because as far as their table knew, this was still April's case. The video, the drawing, the pattern, the fog. The subpoenaed messages had gone to lawyers, not to clients' mothers, and Laura had clearly not volunteered the materials to anyone she feared. They had no idea what was sitting in Susan's bag in a sealed folder, writing to court like a passenger. Magistrate Whitmore took the bench with the enthusiasm of a man returning to a very long essay. Preliminary matters, scheduling the theatre of chairs, and then Laura's attorney called me as a witness, which Susan had predicted with her eyes closed. "They want you flustered," she'd said. "You will not be flustered." I took the stand in the good grey cardigan David calls my deposition sweater. I have been calm through pediatric codes. I have been calm while a father screamed at me in triage because screaming at me was the only thing left he could do for his kid. My hands were folded on the rail. For once, the chart in front of me was my own life. Laura's attorney stood, buttoned his jacket, smiled the way men smile before an easy layup, and asked his first question. "Mrs. Ingram, do you love Jacob?" "Yes," I said. "Objection-proof, short, true," he circled. "You'd agree you've built a strong bond with him?" "I would. You'd like, wouldn't you, to be his mother?" And I looked at Jacob's mother while I answered his lawyer. "He has a mother," I said. "I'm his Molly. Somewhere behind my ribs in the place where I keep things for later." I felt that sentence file itself away. He moved to the documents. "You signed his school reading log on the parent line, correct?" "On the line the form provided?" "Yes. There was no other line. And did it concern you signing as a parent?" "It concerned me enough." I said that last fall I asked the school office whether the form could add a caregiver line, and they reprinted it. And the reprinted form is evidence. It's the one with my name on the caregiver line from October forward. He looked down at his notes a half-second longer than he wanted to. Susan didn't move, but I know satisfaction when I'm sitting near it. He tried the conference. He tried the pancakes, and the answers were short and boring, which was the strategy. Mine and my nurse training. Boring is what true sounds like under oath. So he reached for the centerpiece. "Let's discuss the video," he said. And something in the room tilted toward the screen, and Magistrate Whitmore, who had watched that clip in July, glanced at it with the first visible interest of his morning. I watched Laura's attorney reach to cue the exhibit that his own side had manufactured. The exhibit that had a paper trail behind it now sits in a sealed folder 10 feet from his elbow. He had built his whole case on a stage his client set, and he didn't know it, and his client did. Laura was looking at the table. Susan rose. "Your Honour, before the counsel addresses the video, we'd request a brief recess. And then the part nobody in that room expected. Least of all Laura. I asked to speak with her alone. The hallway outside courtroom 4 has a wooden bench bolted to the wall, and that's where it happened. The real end of the war with both lawyers standing 20 feet away, pretending to check their phones. Close enough to supervise a settlement conversation and far enough not to hear one. Laura sat because her legs decided for her. I stayed standing and I put the folder on the bench between us. "Read it," I said. She opened it. I watched her find her own words. "Be at the Tennessee game. Keep your phone on us. I've been working on it with him all week. He'll say it." I watched her read the first page of Patricia's report where her son, unprompted, in a room with a sand tray, told a court officer what his mother practiced with him in the car. Her hands were shaking by the second page. Mine were still, and I want to be honest about why they were still. Because I had already made my decision, and stillness is what a made decision feels like. Here is what happens if I walk back through that door and hand this to the magistrate. I said, keeping my voice at the level I use for medication, instructions, findings, fees, supervised visits while you sit through an evaluation. Your mother's church gets a story with your name in it that never ever goes away. And in 10 years, a 17-year-old pulls a public file and learns that his sentences were the bullets. She looked up at me then, and she was not a litigant. She was a woman watching the doors close. "Why are you showing me this out here?" she said. "Why not in there?" And I told her the truth. I had crossed that hallway to deliver. "Because you were right about one thing," I said. "He doesn't need two moms. He needs two grown-ups. So, here is the one-time offer. You withdraw every allegation today on the record. We sign a stipulation. The schedule stays exactly as it is. None of your time changes. And all of us, you, me, David, go into family therapy court-ordered so nobody gets to quit. And this folder gets sealed forever. No findings, no file for him to find. It will always say you withdrew. And it will never say I was innocent. I give up on the verdict. You give up the war." She stared at me and her voice came out cracked in the middle. "Why would you give that up?" And 9-year-old me answered her from the back seat of my mother's car. "Because somebody once made me choose sides," I said. "And I know exactly who that little girl grows up to be. She's sitting on this bench." Laura signed. Her attorney read the stipulation in the hallway with the expression of a man watching a winning lottery ticket dissolve in the rain. And to his credit, or his billing forecast credit, he made no speeches. Back inside, the lawyers approached the bench together, which in that building is what a white flag looks like. Magistrate Whitmore read our joint stipulation slowly, then looked up over his glasses at both tables. "Counsel," he said, "in this courtroom, an agreement like this is what the winter solstice is today. Rare and a little suspicious." Then he went through it aloud for the record. "Parenting schedule unchanged. All pending motions withdrawn with prejudice, which is legal for you can't take it back. Family systems therapy for all 3 adults and the minor child through Dr. Reyes's practice with quarterly compliance review court ordered." Exactly as I'd asked, so nobody could drift. The interim restriction on me dissolved, and the designated discovery materials and the Guardian Adams interview excerpts, sealed by agreement of the parties. "So ordered," said Whitmore, and the gavel he didn't even bother to lift fell anyway, somewhere in my chest. And then the part I did not negotiate, the part no one saw coming, least of all me. Laura stood. Her attorney reached for her sleeve. "Missed. Your Honour," she said, and the room got the particular quiet that only unscripted moments get in a courtroom. "For the record, I withdraw every allegation against Mrs. Ingram. All of them." Her voice cracked open on the next sentence, and she said it anyway into a room containing her own mother. "She never tried to take my son, not once." Whitmore watched her for a moment, then nodded. "Noted," he said. And that single word entered the transcript, which is the only place I ever needed it. Carol rose and left the gallery before the session closed. Pearls and posture and silence, and the big oak door swung shut behind her with everyone watching and no one following. What she left behind stayed sealed. Somewhere in a court vault today there is an envelope, and inside it a little boy says, "Molly never asked me to call her that, not even once, to no one forever. That silence is the most expensive thing I own." We drove home on a Tuesday afternoon. Nobody had won. That was the victory. Therapy was not a montage. The first session, Laura sat as far from me as the room allowed and answered in single sentences. And Jacob built a wall out of sandtray fences down the middle of everything, which Dr. Reyes said was not subtle and not bad. Walls are how kids ask if the fighting is really over. In the 4th session, he drew again. Small stuff first. Sharks? Obviously. Dr. Reyes gave him the words we should have given him in April. "You get to love everybody," she told him with all 3 of us listening. "The grown-up feelings in this family are grown-up jobs. You are fired from all of them." Jacob thought being fired was hilarious and something in the room unclenched by a degree. And that's how it went. A degree at a time for months. The bedwetting stopped in October. The nail-biting took longer. The reading log came back to our Tuesday and Thursday counter. And this year's form had the caregiver line printed right on it. And my signature sat there, legal and boring, the way I like my signatures. Laura still used the 4-hour clause. It was still her right. And the first Friday she took, the app chimed with a message that had exclamation points in it and 0 legal vocabulary. "Thanks for the heads up about cleats. That may not sound like a peace treaty in this family. That is the entire Treaty of Paris." In November, Jacob stood in the kitchen doorway with his water cup, and he didn't say, "Hey, he said, "Molly, can I have some water?" My own name. Back in his mouth, like it had never been a landmine. I filled the cup slowly so he wouldn't see my face. Nurses cry in the med, that's the rule, and I broke it standing at my own sink. In the spring, almost a year after a wet soccer field, Dr. Reyes ended a family session by asking Jacob if he wanted to share his homework, and he pulled a folded paper out of his backpack with the ceremony of a boy presenting state secrets, a new drawing. 4 people this time, 2 houses, one lopsided son in the left corner where his sons always live, Mommy in front of one house, Daddy and I in front of each other, my stick figure holding, of course, the frying pan, and underneath in careful backward-leaning letters, a caption that took him 2 lines. I have a mommy and I have Molly. Laura looked at it for a long time the way she once looked at a wall in March, and then she did something no court could have ordered. She laughed wet-eyed and said, "That's exactly right, Bud. That drawing is on our refrigerator today. Not in a binder, no sticker in the corner." The next fall, at his first game of the season, I stood at one end of the bleachers and Laura stood at the other, which is not friendship and was never the assignment. 2 grown-ups, one field between us, holding. Snorts, Jacob stole a pass and scored his second career goal, and he spun around and found us both, one looking at each end of the bleachers, and waved with his whole arm, and both of us stood up at the same time without checking each other first. Carol wasn't there. The women at her church, I'm told, still tell the story her way. Some machines you don't get to switch off, you just stop feeding them your kids. I spent my whole life believing love was a chair you had to earn and guard. And Laura spent hers believing the same thing with better lighting. And in the end, it took a 7-year-old with a crayon to teach the whole courtroom what neither of our mothers ever learned. Love was never a chair somebody has to lose. It's a table. And the only job the grown-ups ever had was to build it longer. That's my story. One stage moment, one sealed envelope, one little boy who told the truth when nobody asked him to. If this reminded you that loving a child is never a crime, share it with someone raising a blended family. Drop a comment telling me where you're listening from. Hit subscribe and I'll see you in the next.